Welcome to the District of Columbia, our nation's capital. People come from all around the United States and the world to walk along the National Mall, the pinnacle of a democratic society. But beyond the museums and monuments, Washington, D.C. is home to more than 650,000 American citizens, including myself. Citizens living their everyday lives in neighborhoods across the city. Citizens who pay taxes. Citizens with no representation in Congress.
The District of Columbia residents have tried many ways to get their equal rights to other American citizens.
Washington, D.C. is in fact a hole in the fabric of democracy. The Constitution mandates each state to be represented in Congress by 2 senators and at least 1 Congress member. But D.C. is not a state. In 1801, Congress passed the Organic Acts, which stripped voting rights from D.C. residents, preventing them from having representation in government.
There will be a capital of the United States, and that Congress will be in charge of that capital. And what it does is it opens the door for what became the District of Columbia to not have any kind of formal representation in Congress. What I mean by that is no real voting representation.
This act has been followed by 200 years of demoralizing policy in which D.C. is subject to congressional overlords. Residents couldn't vote in presidential elections until 1961, when the Constitution was ratified to finally allow it. We didn't even have a local government, a mayor and council, until the Home Rule Act was passed in 1973.
The District Home Rule Act, for example, was passed a little more than 40 years ago. That gave the district, for the first time in 150 years, the right to have its own mayor and city council. And of course, Congress added a delegate to that right as well.
Still today, all locally passed laws, including our own budget for locally raised funds, must be sent for review and approval by Congress. No other jurisdiction in the country is subject to such oversight.
I think that lack of representation affects our community in a huge number of ways, some seen, some unseen. Everything from a congressman from another state who doesn't have any interests in the District of Columbia deciding what we can and can't spend our local funds on if they don't like it.
The other 435 members of the House of Representatives and the 100 members of the Senate can make decisions about what I can and cannot do in my city, and I have no recourse. I can't vote against those people, ever. It means that I and the other 600,000 residents of the city don't have any control over the money that we pay into the local tax system. It
affects social services. It affects the district's ability to make decisions on how to use the money that District of Columbia residents earn and raise on their own. It's really a phenomenal insult to the citizens of the United States and the citizens of the District of Columbia that we still have a system where people who live in the nation's capital have no representation in Congress, no voting representation in Congress. They can't object. They can't participate in decisions of war. They can't participate in decisions of taxation, of gun control, of any of the major issues of the day.
All citizens of the U.S. who live outside of the District of Columbia have 3 people who come to work on Capitol Hill every day on their behalf. Residents of a state can call, email, or visit their senators or Congress member to express their opinion, to be heard. I have no one to call or even visit who will potentially reflect my opinion in Congress. As a D.C. resident, I have no one speaking for me in Congress except for the hardworking Eleanor Holmes Norton, who, with no vote, is ultimately powerless.
The average American has no idea that D.C. exists as an entity that has no representation. I think people know that we have on our license plates taxation without representation, but I don't think that anyone has any idea what that means. I don't believe that someone in Colorado or Utah or even in my home state, New York, knows that they have more of a say in what happens in my life than I do. And I think that the only way for it to ever change would be for us to really educate the rest of the United States on the issues, to talk about what limitations we have and how our lives are often manipulated by Congress, and we don't ever have any choice in what they decide to do.
The solution is difficult. It takes people in power to sympathize with the plight of the powerless.
Folks in D.C. pay taxes like everybody else. They contribute to the overall well-being of the country like everybody else. They should be represented like everybody else.
I know that most residents of the United States do not even know about our status. Our status as the jurisdiction in the United States that not only pays taxes without representation, but pays the highest taxes per capita. That's something even our own residents don't know.
People come from all over the United States to visit Washington, D.C., to walk down the National Mall, and to even pay a visit to their senator or representative in Congress. Ironically, the residents of Washington, D.C. itself cannot pay a visit to their senator or even a representative in Congress. We live in the capital of a country that stands for equality, but we ourselves are unequal.